You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello and welcome to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today we're talking cybersecurity. It's something that all law firms have got to be thinking about. They've got to be protecting themselves against. And whilst we can be a little bit blasé about cybersecurity, Emma is going to remind us today that you simply can't be. That this is too big an issue and it has the potential to affect your business in too big a way for you not to take it more seriously. So I'm delighted to introduce Emma Green. Emma is the managing partner at Cyber Data Law Solicitors. It's great to have you on the podcast, Emma. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, David.
We're going to launch right in. First of all, it'd be really useful for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. We've just been chatting before we started the recording that you've been on Radio 1, you've been on the BBC.
Yeah.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast feels like a little bit of a come down.
No, not at all. No, I'm delighted to be here.
Tell us about yourself.
So, yes, Emma Green, Cyber Data Law Solicitors. I think our strapline is, it's what we do, it's all we do. We specialise in cybersecurity and data protection. There's two strands to it. So proactively, we help businesses to be compliant, we help build frameworks, policies, procedures and training, but we also help reactively when things go wrong. So when somebody's had a cyber attack or a data breach, we help businesses and organizations and law firms to recover from those types of situations. We can also perform litigation, so we can help clients that may be hit with claims. So any contentious work we can also do in the area of cyber and data protection.
I said in the introduction that this is too big an issue for law firms to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
Is the cybersecurity message getting through?
No, it's not. Sadly, it just isn't. We have given many webinars and training sessions to law firms, and it's obvious that a number of them are not even doing the basics. One of the problems is that law firms have very valuable data. When you consider all the clients' files that they hold, that is very, very valuable to cyber criminals, and they really need to step up their game, because we've seen the likes of Ward Hadaway have recently had a big cyber attack. They came out and said they'd had an attack and lots of data had been stolen. And Tuckers, they were attacked a couple of years ago and recently fined £98,000 by the Information Commissioner's Office. So it is a very interesting point for law firms that they really don't seem to be realizing how significant cyber attacks can be for them.
Why is that, do you think?
I think maybe because it's attitude. They think that it'll never happen to us. Like a lot of businesses, not just law firms. Why would they want to attack us? Most people seem to think that cyber attacks are disruption. So your systems are down, you can't log onto a website. It's disruption. But where the missing piece is it's the value of your data, because data is then exfiltrated and then used to hold you to ransom. So one of the modus operandi for cyber criminals these days is they gain access to your systems, they sit there and usually over time exfiltrate data, or they may actually lock you out and take that data. What they'll then do is they'll then say, okay, we've got all this data. If you don't pay our ransom, it's called double extortion. What we'll do is we'll release the data, so we'll cause you a breach. So first of all, they're holding your data as ransom, and secondly, if you don't pay it, they'll release it anyway. So these types of attacks are happening all the time in organizations and law firms, and particularly with law firms, the value of that data, they know that is so much greater, because the last thing a law firm wants is client files splattered all over the dark web.
We've been chatting that you've actually negotiated with some of these criminals. Tell us about that process. That sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, well, first of all, they'll leave you some sort of ransom note, and then it's really just like any other commercial deal. It's ironically based on trust. You need to make sure you've got a cryptocurrency account and negotiate with them, and then they give you data back. It's just like any other commercial deal, to be perfectly honest. It's just that they happen to be criminals. The ICO and the National Cyber Security Centre have come out and they've said that law firms should not be giving advice to pay ransoms. There's two things for that. Firstly, obviously you have to give the client the choice as if they want to pay that ransom or not. You may find your insurers may or may not pay it, depending on what your policy is like. But first of all, you've got to make sure that they're going to give you data back. And negotiating with them, well, it's down to the client's choice. If they may want to keep it quiet. There's a big kind of disjoint there. So the ICO and, like I said, the ICO and the National Cyber Security Centre are saying, don't pay ransoms, don't pay ransoms. But if you're a company or a law firm that's employing people, then you need to get yourself back up and running. So there's a big difference between sort of commercial world versus ideal world. Yes, you're paying criminals, and it will perpetuate what they're doing, but at the same time, you need to get your systems back.
And what guarantees, and you said it was kind of built on trust, but what guarantees are there that this data hasn't been replicated in some way, that it's not going to be used to hold you to ransom again, or are there no guarantees around that?
I don't think there really are any guarantees. You just have to take it on face value, like a lot of things in any business that you do. In our team, we have some forensic guys who can go into basically forums where it's invitation only. So these dark web forums where criminals have to trust other criminals, which sounds a bit weird, to allow you in to see whether that data's there. And bizarrely, there is like an element of loyalty among these criminals, which is, it's sort of taking sort of 1950s gangs online, if you like.
You mentioned that you typically pay in cryptocurrency. Is there sort of an average kind of value that this is costing firms from a ransom point of view?
No, it's how much they'll pay. So it really depends. How valuable is that data to you as to what you're prepared to pay? Are you going to take the risk of your clients finding out that their files are on the dark web, the publicity, reputational damage? It depends how valuable it is to you.
You talked about the way in which criminals infiltrate the organization, and typically they sort of sit there. I'd heard they sit there for about 100 days. Is that?
Yeah, once they're in, they can do. They can sit there for a number of days and then, like I said, slowly start taking your data. But the number one way of getting in is phishing attacks. Now, most people think that phishing is, I'd always spot a phishing email. Well, no, you probably wouldn't. We run phishing campaigns with simulation software, and I ran one last week, and 40% of the company clicked on the phishing emails because they're very, very convincing. They've become way more sophisticated than a few years ago when it was you had a relative in a faraway land who's left you some inheritance. It's become much, much more sophisticated. And if a criminal is absolutely determined to phish you, they'll do their homework. So particularly if you are, let's say, a senior member of staff, they will look into you on social media, and then they'll really research you so that they can target those emails to make them sound really, really convincing. They'll also then target junior members of the team via LinkedIn. So one of the common attacks has been, oh, can you just go and buy some vouchers for, we're going to do an awards ceremony and we'll reimburse you. And they're all fake. And these younger members of the staff think, oh, it's the boss, I must go and do this. And they're not, they're just being phished. So the number one way of getting in, without doubt, is phishing.
And social engineering, that's sort of an element of social engineering behind that.
There can be, yeah. So what I would say to anybody is, when you go onto Facebook and it's got those, oh, what was your first car? And, what's your, fancy name for this or that? Or, what's your first album that you bought? All that's happening is that they aren't quizzes. They are cyber criminals who are getting your secret codes for passwords and things, or finding enough about you to be able to convince you, if they were to ring up or if they were to email you, that they are from a legitimate source when they're not.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's bad. It's really bad. You just got to be really careful what you put out there.
So we've all got this sort of huge digital footprint now.
Yeah.
And you've alluded to the younger generation. Presumably these criminals are sort of stalking you, not just on Facebook, but on things like Instagram and Snapchat and all those kinds of things as well.
It's called doxing, doxing. So in other words, what they do is they're gathering as much information about you so that, like I said, they are convincing when they ring up. And the police and the National Cybersecurity come out and say, look, don't do these stupid quizzes. They're not just for you and all your mates. Somebody's collecting information about you. And you tend to see a rise in them on social media over the holidays. So particularly bank holidays, when people are a bit more bored. Oh yeah, I remember that. What year did you do this? What year did you do that? And all they're doing is they're just collecting all your password, the types of information that you would use for your banking.
You talked about the fact that you guys support firms once they've been attacked. What does that look like? Because I think there's a lot of information out there about prevention, and prevention is always the best protection, isn't it? But there seems to be a dearth of information about what firms can actually do practically to help themselves once they've been the victim of an attack.
Yeah, I mean, I would always say, as you alluded, that prevention's better than cure. Really, it's not a case of if we ever get attacked, it's going to be when, because like I said, you have got such valuable data. Your data has a value. Criminals aren't just going after bank accounts anymore because they, hacking into your client accounts. What they're interested in is that data that they can hold you to ransom to. So you need to decide what is your most valuable data and put in business continuity plans, incident response plans, and test those plans. What would you do if your case management system went offline, you couldn't log in, and you got a ransom note on your screen? What would you do? So there's lots of things you could do to prevent it that would put you in a better place should you be attacked. If you don't do anything and you get attacked, then you're going to have to ring up the likes of us to help you, and your insurers, and then hope that you're going to be covered. But it isn't something that you should think, oh, it's fine. I hear a lot of companies say, oh, well, we've got insurance, so it's fine. Well, okay, the insurance will cover you probably for business interruption for a certain period of time, but they may not cover you for things like support with reporting to regulators. They may not help you at all if you get hit with a bunch of claims from data subjects. They may not pay out if you got a fine. So prevention is better than cure. But if you did get attacked, the first thing to do is consider whether, well, hopefully you will have some sort of insurance. Give people like us a ring. And then what we would do is we would bring forensics in, who would just try and stem the hemorrhaging to see, what exactly has gone on. And then it's a case of see it from there. I mean, one cyber attack we were involved in was actually last August. It was an online and physical retailer with hundreds of stores, and it was ongoing for about 8 months. The forensics investigation. Obviously, we got them back up and running after about 4 or 5 days. But it's working closely with the IT department, working with insurers, and also the board to damage limitate, because the last thing that we want to do is to hurriedly report to various regulators, because again, I've seen some really self-incriminating reporting where you just think, no, I'd have just slowed down a bit and found out a bit more information first. But yeah, try and do prevention rather than cure.
And there are a number of accreditations out there. You think about things like Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus. We've talked about IASME. You've got ISO.
27001, yeah.
Are they effective? Do they work? Are they worth the paper they're written on?
I think they are. I mean, Cyber Essentials is a bit like Marmite. People either love it or they hate it. They think it's personally, having spoken to Hiscox, they're very pro the likes of Cyber Essentials, because if nothing else, it makes a firm think about cybersecurity. So think about your firewalls, think about passwords, those kinds of things. So in that case, it can only really be a positive thing. Some argue that it's a bit too generic, but personally, I think it's good. I'm a Cyber Essentials assessor, and I've assessed over 600 assessments in the last 2 years, and some of the because what happens when you're marking an assessment, if somebody, for example, has Windows XP, I failed them because they say, it's out of date, you need it up to date patches. So that will then go back to the customer, the client, and then they will look at reviewing that. So therefore that can only be a good thing. ISO 20, any of the frameworks like ISO 27001, NIST, the National Cyber Security Centre do one as well. Again, putting all those policies, procedures in place, and also rolling them out and implementing them, so operationalizing them, don't just shove them in a drawer, is all going to be good, because it's going to bolster your defenses. Anything that bolsters your defenses is positive. Just not bothering and thinking, oh well, it's fine, we've got insurance, or it'll never happen to us. Well, that's not going to do you any favors in the long run.
What experience have you got with dealing with insurers around cyber? Do they accept that Cyber Essentials is going to reduce risk and therefore reduce policy pricing, or what's your sort of take on that?
Yeah, we do work quite closely with insurers, and there is no standardization for a lot of insurers in terms of certifications, because Cyber Essentials is a bit like Marmite, and some insurers say, well, it's too generic. In the States, it's different. In the US, they sort of do like a full audit of your systems before you get insurance. But it's just a case of filling in the application, and any broker that you go through will support you by saying, right, okay, you need two-factor. This insurer is not going to insure you at all unless you've got two-factor or multi-factor authentication on all of your case management system. So you're not going to get insurance at all. So there is a move, because insurance has gone up exponentially over the since COVID. Cyber insurance was tick box at the bottom of a form up until COVID, really, and then it went crazy over COVID because everybody sat at home, and criminals can't break into Windows. They were kind of going online, and phishing attacks, COVID phishing attacks, went through the roof. And what was happening is people picked up their laptops and ran home, and they were using software that hadn't gone through proper procurement process. They were using things like Google Docs that completely open, and there were massive increase in attacks. One of our clients' insurance, their premium was 13,000 with a 25,000 excess, and then in 2021, 1 year later, it was 100,000 with a 500,000 pound excess. So that goes to show you how insurance has gone through the roof. So what a lot of companies are doing, because it's becoming so expensive, is they're effectively self-insuring, because cyber insurance for a lot of businesses is really just a tick box for their suppliers or their partner, the organizations they work with, because it has become so expensive, because it's so kind of volatile. It moves so rapidly. Insurers in the past don't move that quickly, and so a lot of pulled out of the market, and a lot of them are also shoving up the premiums because so many people have been attacked. So those things I mentioned before about your patches and 2FA, that will help you with your cyber insurance. But don't just think, well, I've got insurance, happy days, because they're updating clauses all the time to say, well, although they have said that the government have come out and said that if you were attacked by Russians, that it wouldn't be deemed an act of war, so they can't use those clauses. And paying ransoms is not a criminal. Then it's not going to criminalize it. So insurers can't wiggle out of it that way. But don't just think, I've got insurance, I'm fine, because I think you might find, well, you won't get insurance the next year. And it might not cover you for everything.
I think it's fair to say that you've scared us a little bit more on this podcast, Emma. And the message to firms is this has to be taken seriously. You can't sit back, like you say, you can't sit back and wait for it to happen. And it will happen because this is happening all the time. Today's conveyancer is the victim of hundreds of spam and phishing messages daily. And I think we must never forget that criminals are very, very intelligent people. Actually, these are very, very sophisticated and intelligent organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've only got to get it right once. You've got to get it right all the time. So some of the things that I would stress that firms consider is making sure you've got a business continuity plan. What would happen in the event of a cyber attack that takes you down? Would you be able to remember when those court dates are and get access to files. You need to be able to continue to run your business if things get locked out. So the number one thing I would say is training of your staff, phishing campaigns, simulating the types of phishing emails that come in. Two-factor authentication, often called multi-factor authentication. That's where you've got most systems these days support that. That's where you log in with your name and password, and then there's a secondary PIN, usually through a separate application on, let's say, on your phone or a text message. So it backs. Also, if somebody was trying to hack in with your details, you'd usually get a notification. Keep your software patches up to date. I know it's really annoying when your iPhone says, "Oh gosh, you need an update," and you think, "Oh God, it's going to take my phone out for an hour." There is a reason for that, and that's because the likes of Apple have found a flaw in their software that's been exploited by cyber criminals. Make sure you got antivirus, firewalls are kept up to date. But I would say the biggest weakness in your organization is the people in it. So it's going to be your employees. They're the ones that are going to accidentally just click on a link without realizing it and just open the door for somebody to come in and just sit there. So you need to make sure you've got all of those things, test those plans. Would your business continue? Insurers say that the biggest expense to them is business interruption. So the biggest expense is making sure that business can continue to operate whilst it's down, if that makes sense. So it's and Aon, I was watching a webinar by Aon, the insurers, and they were saying that professional services, 25% of the claims that come into them are from professional services such as the legal sector, the accounting sector, because that data is just so incredibly valuable. Don't just think cyber attack, disruption, think actually they're taking my data. My data is a commodity that can be traded. And I think that's the bit that's missing. So if you put all those things in place, build some frameworks, think of things like Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus, you're going to put yourself in a much better position than by not really doing anything.
And we were talking before the recording about some of the ways that criminals doctor documents and information that's circulated between law firms.
What's called business email compromise, that's where somebody gets into your emails and doctors an invoice, is something that originated in conveyancing, and it's still going on a grand scale. We've had clients whose suppliers have paid hundreds of thousands of pounds and gone bankrupt because their invoices have been doctored. So another top tip I would say to you is that if anybody, and again it sounds common sense, but if anybody gives you new payment details, make sure you contact the original person by phone, not via email, and test the bank details by transferring £1. Because so many firms, solicitors I know, have transferred a lot of money and it's gone, and the likelihood of getting it back, if you've authorized the payment, the push payment, if you've authorized it. With one client, they're a divorce law firm, and they client said, "Can I transfer the money?" She did. An hour later, the real client rang up and said, "Where's my money?" And she transferred 50 grand. The bank had rung up and said, "Are you sure you want to send it here?" She said, "Yeah," transferred it. And then, and she'd actually, between you and me, she also sent a court order, but that's another story. So to a wrong email address, and it's gone. You've had it then.
Yeah.
So it's really tricky to get it back. I actually said to the police, is there a threshold for an amount that has to have been stolen before you do anything about it? Thinking it's back, I don't know, 10, 20 grand. And they just said, there is no limit. It's about solvability. So if we can recover that money, then we will. If we've got a relationship with the country where the money's gone, we will. But if we haven't, then we won't. So it's not about the amount, it's about whether the police can actually help you. And also when it goes outside of the jurisdiction, is it in the public interest to spend all that public money recovering funds for you? So that's something to think of. Don't think, we've got the police, we've got insurance, we've got action fraud. No, it's still a bit of the Wild West, I'm afraid.
Some top tips for firms there, Emma. Thanks very much indeed for sharing. And I think, like you say, a lot of it's common sense. A lot of it is really around just making sure that people understand the risks, and education. Education is a huge part of this, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been a delight to have you on, albeit you've scared the life out of us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. Thank you again, Emma. Thank you very much indeed for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.